that have sensitive or ambiguous areas. So I think
we will leave the last few minutes of this event now to take you live to Capitol Hill, where the Senate is about to gavel in for the day. At noon Eastern today, senators will take a vote on whether to continue debate on a Democratic proposal aimed at addressing the doubling of student loan interest rates. The bill, sponsored by Democratic Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, would roll back the student loan interest rate to 3.4% for 1 year to give lawmakers more time to craft a more permanent fix. In the meantime, a bipartisan group of senators are still working behind the scenes to come up with an alternative that would tie student loan interest rates to the 10-year Treasury note. The Senate may stay on this student loan issue throughout the week. Live coverage now of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty and ever-blessed God, we thank you for your divine grace that sustains us and for each evidence of your Spirit's leading in our nation and world. Lord, inspire our senators to walk in your light as they grow in grace and develop a greater knowledge of you. Make them this day human channels through which your love can flow to bring harmony where there is discord and hope where there is despair. Empower them to lift high the lamp of truth to illuminate our nation and world. Incline their hearts to follow your leading, knowing that in due season they will reap if they persevere. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 10, 2013. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Joe Donnelly, a senator from the state of Indiana, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President Pro Tempore.
President.
The Majority Leader.
President, I returned from Nevada this Sunday. On Saturday, I had a briefing by the head of the Forest Service in Nevada. And we thought things were going really well with the fires in Nevada. And they were. Progress was being made. Limited, but progress was being made. But since then, the fires have gotten much worse. Not everyone can see this, Mr. President, but I have here a picture that of course, I didn't get this till early this morning, didn't have a chance to blow it up, so we could put it on an easel. But, Mr. President, this is the beginning of the Las Vegas Strip. This is downtown Las Vegas. And it's called the Carpenter Fire. You can see it burning. It is only about 10 miles from Las Vegas, maybe 12 at the most. You can see Mount Charleston is a 12,000-foot mountain. The flames are shooting way above that. The smoke is, we don't get many clouds in southern Nevada, but the smoke cloud here is intense. One of my staff indicated that that's in where she lives, it's raining ash. This is really a devastating fire. And the firefighters are doing the very best they can in a very, very difficult situation. So my thoughts go out to the thousands who have been evacuated from their homes in southern Nevada's Mount Charleston area. I think it'd be hundreds would be a better way to say that, where the Carpenter 1 fire is called, has burned more than 30 square miles of forest and desert. The first responders, my heart goes out to them. They're working really very, very hard. Extremely rugged terrain. They're doing a lot of this in air with helicopters and large airplanes. A couple areas have been saved because these firefighters have been able to cut ways so that flames don't jump over into these houses. Yesterday the wind changed and one of the roads going up to Mount Charleston, Cow Canyon, it jumped that road, so it's burning there, getting closer to some of the homes that we're so concerned about. Lives have been saved as a result of what the firefighters are doing. They've been working around the clock to contain the blaze and protect their communities. Unfortunately, Mr. President, this is southern Nevada, where we had heat last week, virtually every day of from 112 to 117. So it's hot in Las Vegas without this fire. We don't get much rain. We get an entire year, we get 4 inches of rain. So the summer heat and these dry conditions and the winds are really working against the firefighters. But they're working very, very hard. But the progress that we were making was erased yesterday as fire jumped Cow Canyon Road, as I said, spread to new forest and new desert land. We thought everyone would be able to return to their homes in Cow Canyon yesterday, but with the fire having spread the way it did, we hope they can get back to their homes soon. We've had a number of hotels in Las Vegas who've allowed people who have been displaced to have free accommodations in their homes. As I indicated, Mr. President, smoke can be seen every place. You know, we have 2 million people now in Las Vegas, and this fire, everybody can see it. As I said, these flames, you can see them well over the 12,000-foot mountain. The Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service are all working with other federal agencies and state agencies that have assisted firefighters in containing the blaze and helping residents to move. There's also a fire burning in Reno, south of Reno. It's called the Bison Fire. It's the largest fire ever recorded in western Nevada. People have been, especially in the Pipeline Canyon area, have been urged to evacuate. So I'm going to continue to monitor both these fires because they are disasters. I've appreciate all the work done on state level. I've extended my office, extended my support to Governor Sandoval, do everything we can to assist the state, anything that they need. And I'll do everything that I can to ensure that every federal resource that's available will be made available to support local officials and the fire crews. There are currently more than 20 active fires in 11 states, including Nevada's neighbors, California, and we all know about the fire in Arizona, but there are others, Oregon, Idaho, Utah. So we have thousands of firefighters working around the clock to save lives and save property. I'll do everything I can, I repeat, to help them. In a couple hours, Mr. President, we'll vote on whether to begin debate on our plan to keep loan rates low for students for an additional year. Last month, Republican obstruction forced interest rates to double from 3.4 to 6.8% for about 7 million college students. If we fail to roll back this increase, those students will each pile on lots of new debt to get a college education. These higher rates will be particularly harmful to low and middle income families rely on these federal loans more than anyone else. We have the Pell Grants, which go to the low-income people, but people who are middle class have to do these loans. School's gotten so expensive. States have cut back on the support they give colleges, so this is just a very, very difficult situation. Students shouldn't suffer because of some senators standing in the way of that compromise. That's why we proposed a one-year extension of last year's 3.4%. So we don't want it to double. The extension will allow us to craft a long-term solution to mounting college debt without harming students in the short term. Mr. President, I do say, however, that a number of senators met at my direction this morning and at 9 o'clock, and there's progress being made. Maybe we can come up with a compromise that, while imperfect, like a lot of things that happen legislatively, will be a way for us to move forward. The meeting went very well. It was done in Senator Durbin's office. Democrats and Republicans attended that meeting. I think we're making some progress. Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 124, S. 1328.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 124, S. 1238, a bill to amend the Higher Education Act of 1965 to extend the current reduced interest rate for undergraduate federal direct Stafford loans for 1 year and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, following the remarks of Senator McConnell, the time until noon will be equally divided and controlled between the two of us, with each senator permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. At noon, there will be a cloture vote on the motion to proceed to the legislation I just talked about.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
for more than a month, I've been coming to the floor to talk about student loan reform. I've said that to an outside observer, this is an issue that should have been an easy bipartisan slam dunk. I've noted that the proposals put forward by both President Obama and congressional Republicans have been strikingly similar, that we both agree on the need for permanent reform, and that we agree on the need to help all students and not just some of them. Yet here we are after the July 4th deadline, and Senate Democrats are still blocking bipartisan student loan reform. You have to ask yourself, why? Well, because they've prioritized politics over helping students. There are basically two different Democratic groups battling for supremacy here: a more responsible reform permanently faction and a more political campaign permanently faction. In the first group are the sensible Democratic senators who agree with both President Obama and Republicans that it's time to finally solve this issue, that Washington should actually help students and stop using them as pawns in a political chess match. They support the bipartisan compromise plan put forward by Democrat, Republican, and independent senators alike. Unfortunately, this faction is opposed and outnumbered by the campaign permanently Democrats. They're the ones who I suspect would actually prefer to see rates lapse so they can manufacture another campaign issue. And to hear the public musings of some top Democrats, you'd have to conclude that the Democratic leadership is on the side of the campaign permanently and against helping students. As the Majority Leader put it a few weeks ago, we're not looking for compromise. Majority Leader said, we're not looking for compromise. Another Democratic senator and leadership boasted that a goal in this debate was to show, quote, the difference between the two parties on a key issue. I mean, this is just the kind of thing that makes people so cynical about Washington. Washington Democrats yell and wave their arms about the need for something, and then they appear to do everything possible behind the scenes to sabotage it, apparently so they can manufacture a politically convenient crisis. They're doing it on student loans, and they've been doing it with nominations, too. All week it seems they've been breathlessly telling any reporter who will listen that we've got a nominations crisis around here. A nominations crisis around here. It's really laughable that Republicans are holding up the president's nominees. To hear some of the over-the-top rhetoric, you'd think Republicans had blocked all of the president's second-term cabinet nominees. But then, of course, you'd be entirely wrong. Because the truth is, since the president swore his oath of office in January, the Senate has confirmed every single cabinet pick that's been brought up for a vote. Every single one of them. Let me repeat that. Every single one that's been brought up for a vote. They've all been confirmed. Many of them have been confirmed on unanimous or nearly unanimous votes. And just yesterday, the ranking Republican on the Environment and Public Works Committee announced his support for an up or down vote on Gina McCarthy's nomination to be EPA administrator. So there's no question she's going to be confirmed. So it's clear that facts are getting in the way of the Democrats' arguments, which is why they're forced to gin up this fake, absolutely fake nominations crisis. It's why we see them bringing out all the nominees who've been appointed to office either illegally or who are exceedingly controversial. Democrats themselves have delayed consideration of these nominees literally for months because the majority leader determines the timing. It's the Democrats who did that so they could pull them all out of the woodwork at the same time in the hopes the Senate would reject them. Democrats are out there just daring the Senate to do it. They want it so badly it appears to be their goal. And there's a reason for this. It's because the far left base seems to be getting fed up with the democratic process. The big labor bosses are sick of waiting for the special interest legislative kickbacks they must feel they're owed. And now they know that altering the rules of our democracy is the only way to get what they want. This isn't going to work. The facts show the truth, and the truth is that any crisis over nominations is a crisis of Washington Democrats' own making, one they've stirred up intentionally, an absolutely manufactured crisis by any objective analysis. As of last night, there were 140 nominees pending in various committees. These nominees are under the control of the majority, not us. And there are a little over 24 or so eligible for expedited floor consideration, many of whom Republicans have already said we'd pass unanimously. Why hasn't the majority leader called for votes on any of these folks? Clearly, if anyone is obstructing here, Mr. President, it's the majority leader. Because this whole conversation isn't really about making the Senate work better, and he knows it. It's all about his power grab. Well, let me just caution him again to think long and hard about what he's doing. As one of the most senior members of the Democratic Party said yesterday, deploying the nuclear option would mean breaking the rules to change the rules. Breaking the rules to change the rules. As the majority leader himself once said, and I quote, "It would ruin our country." We all know why. Once the trigger is pulled, there would be no limit to the consequences. Not just for Republicans or for our country, but for Democrats too. They should think very carefully about the ramifications for them when a future Republican president makes his own appointments to the cabinet and to the federal bench. Look, we know Senate Democrats are not serious about implementing student loan reform. They've already demonstrated that by blocking just about every bipartisan effort to do so. But on the nuclear option, it is certainly my hope that cooler heads will prevail. I have to believe they'll choose the long-term health of our democracy and of their party over what frankly amounts to the narrowest of short-term political considerations. Pulling the nuclear trigger is not something the history books will look favorably on, and they know it. And of course there will be consequences. when the President was in the Senate back in 2005, and the then Republican majority was thinking about something akin to this, this is what the President had to say. If they choose to change the rules and put an end to the democratic debate, then the fighting, the bitterness, and the gridlock will only get worse. The President was entirely correct. Senator Reid said in 2009, just a couple of years ago, there is no way I would employ the nuclear option. No way. He said it would, quote, ruin our country. He said it would have destroyed the Senate as we know it. Hopefully that was not then, and there's some different standard now. And of course we know we had this debate at the beginning of the year. Actually, we've had it at the beginning of the last two Congresses. And the Senate, the occupant of the chair, had newly arrived here, voted on 2 rules changes and 2 standing orders, after which the majority leader said the rules issue for this Congress is over. He gave his word in January of this year. We're waiting to see if that word will be kept. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the time until 12 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte.
The senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I come to the Senate floor today.
The Senate is in a quorum call.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk about the future of student loans for America's students. And when I say students, I have to define what that is, because as we know today, we've got students of all ages. We've got financial impact that's applied to a 19-year-old that's entered for their first freshman year. And depending upon where the income of their family is, depends on whether, under the current system, they get a subsidized loan. And the maximum that they can receive under that subsidized loan as an undergraduate is $3,500. Now, I'd be willing to bet that the President and I both can't pick an institution in our states where the tuition on an annual basis is $3,500. It just doesn't happen today. And that's the reality that's been left out of the debate so far. This debate has been all about politics, and it's not been about students. And it's not been about how to apply affordability as broadly as we can in the marketplace. Let me describe to you where we are today. Between 1965 and 1992, the cap on the student loan program in this country was 10%. 10%. In the mid-2000s, Congress politically said, you know what, we're going to adjust it, and subsidized loans are going to be at 3.4%. And non-subsidized loans are going to be at 6.8%. And graduate loans are going to be at 7.9%. And if you're a parent borrowing, you're going to have an even higher rate. It's in the 8+% range. Now, to me, that strikes me as incredibly unfair, because we take two undergraduates, two 19-year-olds, two enter in the same institution with the same financial obligation, and we say to one, we're going to give you a rate on your student loan that's half of the person that sits in the seat next to you. Half. 3.4% sitting in this chair and 6.8% sitting in this chair. And understand that the person sitting in this chair, depending upon the cost of the institutions, parents may have an income over $100,000 and they may qualify for a federal subsidy. Let me suggest to you that the marketplace is the thing that ought to dictate and decide what the rate is. That's the only thing that's fair to the taxpayers in this country, is the predictability of knowing that it's tied to something. Now, let me suggest to you that the bill that we're going to take up, and we're going to vote on a motion to proceed at 12 o'clock today, is a bill that was created in the 2000s, and 2 years ago we kicked the can down the road and said we're just going to extend this inequitable student loan program, 3.4% for some, 6.8% for others, 7.9%, and 8+% for parents. Why? Because we're overcharging some to subsidize others. Let me say that again. We're overcharging some. We're overcharging some undergraduates, 19-year-old freshmen in college, 6.8%, so that they'll subsidize the 3.4% that we're charging subsidized loans. Now, let me just point to a chart that I've got here, Madam President, and it shows undergraduates under the student loan. And this is a comparison. Let me move to another chart just real quick, because I think this one best displays what I'm talking about. 26% of our nation's kids are undergraduates and subsidized. 55% of the eligible students are either undergraduates or graduate students that fall under a 6.8% interest rate. So when the Senate Majority Leader came to the floor and said some were upstairs trying to negotiate a deal, he was 100% accurate. But the reality is we're still going to have a vote on only one plan at 12 o'clock. There's no option for members of Congress. And what I would suggest to you is that here displays why, at best, there should be two options, and at worst, we ought to vitiate the motion to proceed and see if we can come up with another bipartisan agreement. You see, the option, the Manchin bill, is a bipartisan approach. It's Democrats and Republicans coming together and saying we can agree on something that we think is fair and equitable and financially sustainable. But this is the plan we're going to have a vote on at 12 o'clock. 55% of the population of students, quite frankly, is being screwed. They're overpaying. They're paying 6.8% for interest. It would be hard for any American to be charged 6.8% to borrow money today when a home mortgage for 15 years is 3.8%. Yet we're charging students 6.8%, and we're saying that to go to this is an injustice to our students, where all of a sudden we take 64% of the kids and we treat them all alike and we charge them 3.66%. Something's inherently wrong in the debate that we're having. If this is about kids and about affordability, this is the plan that we should be having the motion to proceed, not this one. This plan merely kicks the can down the road for 12 more months. Now, let me just say, this plan wasn't created by Joe Manchin or Richard Burr or Tom Coburn or Senator King or Senator Alexander. This plan was created by the Congressional Budget Office. The Congressional Budget Office in 2011, in their March report to Congress, they came up with the idea of tying the interest rate to the 10-year Treasury bond, except the CBO said it should be the 10-year Treasury bond plus 3%. And you know what? That's what Senator Coburn and I introduced. And when Senator Manchin, Senator King, Senator Alexander, Senator Carper, others got involved, we decided that what we needed to do was continue to have a blended rate. But we all agreed that an undergraduate student shouldn't face an interest rate schedule that is not equitable to all undergraduates. So instead of applying it to 26%, we applied it to 100% of the undergraduates. We said, if you're an undergraduate in college, we're going to give you the best rate, which is the 10-year bond plus 1.85. It's fair, it's understandable, it's predictable, it's consistent. A year in advance, you know exactly what your rate's going to be because it's determined based upon the 10-year bond every May. Now, my good friend, who I have great affection for, Senator Harkin, came to the floor. And he said that we were balancing the budget on the back of this student loan program. The student loan program is a $1.3 trillion program. Let me say that again, $1.3 trillion with a T. And based upon the CBO score on this bill, it had a 0.7% surplus. 0.7. Now, by Washington standards, in a billion-dollar program, 0.7 would be a rounding error. This is a $1.3 trillion program, and let me assure the President and my colleagues, this is a rounding error. I can't look everybody in the face and say, might not cost us $100 billion, might save us $100 billion, but we're certainly not balancing a $17 trillion debt on the backs of this student loan program. Let me assure you of that. And for any that suggests that we are, is in fact disingenuous. Let me suggest to you, Madam President, that this is the first time I've been accused of balancing the budget on the backs of our kids. But in 2010, as part of the Health Care Reform Act, Democrats ended the Federal Family Education Loan Program, FEEL, at a savings of $61 billion. Of that, the Democrats directed $19 billion to deficit reduction and the rest to help pay for Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. If I'm being accused of balancing the budget on 0.7% determined by CBO, and In 2010, the Democrats voted to eliminate the Pell program and saved $61 billion and applied $19 billion to deficit reduction and the rest to help for the Affordable Care Act. Then they plowed this ground long before me. As a matter of fact, in 2007, as part of the College Cost Reduction and Access Act, the Democrats found $21 billion in savings and spent a good amount of it on new programs, and then directed $1 billion to deficit reduction. I said earlier, I have great affection for Senator Harkin. And Senator Harkin said, well, this should be part of the Higher Education Reauthorization Act that may or may not happen next year. Well, we made changes to the interest rate on student loans outside of the Higher Education Reauthorization in 2012 with a one-year extension of the 3.4%. We did it in 2010 with the elimination of the FELP program. We did it in 2005 under the CCRAA, the Deficit Reduction Act. Senator Harkin's Appropriations Committee has made changes to the eligibility rules for Pell Grants each of the past several years outside of the higher education authorization, including elimination of summer eligibility, ability to benefit, and lower of the automatic enrollment for low-income students. I mean, it's just not fair to come and say to me that I'm doing it outside of higher education reauthorization when there's a track record continually of the person that accused us of doing it himself. Let me say that he is accurate. I'd be happy to yield.
If I could, first of all, I want to thank the good senator for working in such a bipartisan manner. And I think this truly is a bipartisan bill. If this bill has been described as belonging to one party or the other, it's wrong. We sat down, and I think that Senator from North Carolina, Senator Burr, and Senator Alexander, and Senator Coburn, myself, Senator King, and we had Senator Carper, and looked at basically how we could fix something. And I think we looked at it from the standpoint that this deadline hit. We knew 1 year ago when we extended it, they said it was a political atmosphere, we had to extend it. And we knew that year would come, and if, like everything else that's happened here for the last 2 or 3 years, nothing gets done. So we just said enough was enough. It has to be fixed. And if you want to fix it, look at the whole program. You had to understand the programs. I think now they're saying that, accusing that the students are paying profit so that we can pay down debt. Whether there's profit built in or not, depending on the accounting procedures that's used by our federal government, it was built in. You can blame whoever you want to blame, but it's built into it. We've got to deal with the facts in front. So, Senator, I think what I would ask, we have proven that we're willing, all of us have agreed in a bipartisan manner, no profit will be made on the backs of students, what we can determine through our bill that we're working on, right?
Incorrect.
So we've all come to that agreement as Democrats and Republicans, no profit for debt reduction. It should all go in lowering the rates, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we've agreed to that. We've agreed on a long-term fix, 10 years versus kicking it down the road for another year, knowing another year will come and go, and we'll probably be sitting here again debating it. That's what we've come to the conclusion. And we've also agreed, which is different than what the House sent us, and I applaud you all for working with us, to put a fixed rate. So if it's at 3.66 this year and I borrow, and I'm able to qualify, I'm subsidized at $3,500, a subsidized loan that the taxpayers will be paying, that 3.66 is fixed for the full life of the loan. We agreed on that, correct?
That's correct.
So these are things that we've come, and when they say it's the Republican bill or that's so erroneous, and it's just not fair. This is truly a bipartisan effort, and we're working with all of the colleagues in my caucus, and I know you all in your caucus, to understand that if I'm a subsidized Stafford loan, that means that the federal government, the taxpayers of this country, will pay my interest while I'm in school, correct?
That's correct.
At the end of that, then I pick up whatever interest rates that have accumulated when I was in school, and I take it from that day forward. What they didn't understand, and I think what a lot of our colleagues don't understand, I can't make it just on that $3,500. I've got to go and borrow more money. So now I'm borrowing money if I go with my colleagues on the Democrat side, I've got to borrow all that at 6.8%. We were able, Senator, in a bipartisan way to bring that to what, 3.66 for all undergraduates, correct?
You're correct, and I might add to my good friend that this chart shows exactly what he talked about, that under the plan that we will vote at 12 o'clock, because of the need for students in the subsidized category to borrow additional money at 6.8%, at the end of their process, they owe $78 a month, where under the bipartisan bill, where every undergraduate is treated the same, they owe $75. It's actually cheaper, even for the undergrads that are subsidized.
But what I'm saying is, the money that I have to borrow, even though I qualify because of my income for a subsidized loan, I don't have to pay the interest on an annual basis. I don't make it on that, so I do have to pay it. So by bringing it down to one low rate, I make a much lower payment. It's less obligation, it's less hardship on me as a college student to make that lower payment than it would be to make the higher payment, just because the optics were, we want to help the subsidized, really poor kids. I might be poor, but I can't make it on just what you give me because I'm poor. I got to have a little bit more help. And we're not looking at the whole picture here. And then on top of that, I want to go to graduate school after I get my college degree. Then you bump me up, I'm at 6.8 again. Ours brings it down to 5.21, which is more savings, which the Senator, I know, agrees to. Senator, if I may, and I might ask our Senator from Tennessee, my colleague from Tennessee, whoever would like to start to talk about this, but let's say that right now we know we have a consolidated cap at 8.25%. So let's say that I graduated and I went to school during high recession times. So at the end, I have an 8.75% accumulative interest I owe. I can cap that and go in and consolidate 8.25, correct? Senator from Tennessee?
If I may respond to the Senator from
Absolutely.
West Virginia. First, I'd want to congratulate Senators Manchin and Burr for helping the full Senate understand this issue. This is, like a lot of issues we have to face, not simple. I mean, I used to be a college president. I used to be the United States Secretary of Education. I had to re-educate myself on this legislation. I still made some mistakes. I was saying last night, for example, that there were only 2 million subsidized loans. And what I was forgetting was the point that the Senator from West Virginia makes, which was 80% of the students who have subsidized loans, the low-income students, also have the unsubsidized loans. So when you only take care of these subsidized loans, you're leaving 7 million students with unsubsidized loans up here hanging high and dry, and nobody's taking care of them. So you're hurting both the middle-income families and the low-income families when you have an incomplete solution. But the question, the Senator from West Virginia posed the question, is it right that, let's say I graduate from the University of Tennessee and I've had 2 loans. I've had the subsidized loan, and that means the government's been paying my interest while I'm in college. And typically, if I'm like 4 out of 5 students, I've had a unsubsidized loan, so I've paid that interest. And suddenly the interest rates have gone up for me because, well, the interest rates have gone up to 10%. What I can do is take both those loans, I could take all my government loans at once and turn them into an 8.25% loan. So that's in effect a cap on my loan. And that means, and then I would have the choice, and I would say this back to the Senator from West Virginia or North Carolina, when I consolidate my loan at 8.25%, I've heard some senators say, well, that just means the student's going to have to pay a lot of interest because it spreads the loan out over a long period of time. But does not the student have that choice? I mean, isn't it like if you want a 15-year mortgage, you have higher monthly payments, but you pay less interest because you pay it off quick. But
what they're referring to, and it might be misunderstood, Senator, if I may, is that everyone will take the longest longest period of time. I'm understanding, and I think I'm accurate and correct on this, that, okay, I want the smallest payment. I just got out of school, so I want my smallest payment. Now I'm getting better jobs 4 or 5 years out. I got a better job. Instead of paying $150 a month, I can afford to pay $300 or $400 on my... There is no penalty for me to shorten that, as it would be in a conventional market. Is that how you understand it?
The senator would, Madam President, I'd ask consent that the senator from North Carolina and West Virginia and I be permitted to engage in a colloquy for a few minutes.
Without objection.
That's how I understand. I would say to the senator from North Carolina, if I would presume a graduate of the University of North Carolina would be smart enough to make that decision for herself or himself, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think they would. I think one of the agreements that we came to was that students ought to be in control of their decisions about their loan rate based upon what was available to them. And if a student goes through the next 4 years and they have a combined interest rate of about 4.5%, for the life of the loan, why in the world would they be excited at an 8.25? If for some reason 10 years from now somebody got out of school and their combined interest rate was 9%, we give them the option of going back to 8.25. And I think the senator from West Virginia made an extremely good point. For the most subsidized student, they can only borrow $3,500 that's subsidized.
Is that wrong?
So you think of the institutions that are out there, none of them have an annual tuition of $3,500. We know that they're going to borrow out of the 6.8% pot. What we're offering is that the pots are the same, and that the subsidy is that for students that qualify for the subsidy, they're not responsible for the interest rate while they're in school. That subsidy still exists. It's just we're not overcharging one group, and we're certainly not overcharging the ones we just subsidized because they've got to borrow more money to complete their college education.
My friends, let me just say that I graduate now, no matter what the interest rates are, no matter what they might have been. I graduate, and economic times are tough. I find a job. It's not what I think my value is, but I find a job at $40,000. And $40,000, I'm married now and I have a child or two. Don't we have in our bill a protection which has been in place for a long time? Both Democrats and Republicans have supported this protection, which is called income-based repayment. I'm only, by law, I can only pay 15% of my disposable income, and I think that breaks down to my payment can only be $142. $142, and so isn't that a subsidy too? Or wouldn't we be subsidizing that to a certain extent? And I'm also understanding if my economic condition doesn't improve, and that's all I pay, by the end of 25 years, it's exonerated. I pay nothing. I'm done.
If I could respond to the senator, the answer is yes to that. Not only is there, and I think it's fair to say that the consolidation option that a student has in case the rates go up at 8.25% can be called a cap. Not a hard cap, but it's a cap. And the second cap is this income repayment provision that you speak of. If you're making $40,000 a year, after they apply the formula, you probably aren't spending more than about 10% of your income. It's something called disposable income that you can be required to pay on your student loan, and that continues for about 20 years. And if at the end of 20 years you haven't paid it off, the loan is forgiven. So any student who has a loan has that opportunity. They can consolidate at 8.25%, and income repayment limits the amount they have to pay each year. So they have that. And then one of the things I notice about the Manchin-Burr bill that I'd like to ask the senators to talk about a little bit is that you've come up with a really, what I'm beginning to understand as I study this more and more, is a very significant contribution. The idea that all of the undergraduate student loans, which as I understand it are about 2 out of 3 of the loans, ought to have the same interest rate. it's confusing the way it is now. But the other reason is about 80% of the people who have subsidized loans, low-income students, also have unsubsidized loans. And so your contribution is to say, let's simplify it, provide certainty over a long period of time, and treat all undergraduates the same. Otherwise, it seems to me, you're leaving 7 million middle-income students who have unsubsidized loans high and dry, and the 80% of the low-income students who also have these unsubsidized loans, you're not helping them either. So I wonder if you could comment on this idea. And I notice without a cap, you're able to get the interest rate for all undergraduates' loans down to about 3.66%, which is a pretty low rate.
Let me just say that very quickly. I'll use $10 million hypothetically that's borrowed every year. 10 billion, 10 million, whatever you want to use. 25% of that money goes to the subsidized, just 25%. And I understand that's close to about 40% of the students that participate in borrowing money. But the volume of money is about 25%, 1/4 of the money that's loaned out. So if we're keeping the rates low on 1/4 of the money, that means that we artificially have much higher rates on 3/4 of the money that students need to get an education. What we're saying is we're going to bring a larger majority of that down to the lowest rate. And we think it's a good policy that we should be discussing and talking about. And that's where we are. And that's why we come up with the plan that we did. But we reduced all the rates. The plus loans, I think, Senator, went from 7.9, 621? Yep. And then we had the graduate loans went from 6.8 to 5.21. But if you do all of the undergraduate, it would go from 3.4 to 3.66, a quarter, 2.6, a 0.26.
Is for the undergraduates that were not subsidized, they would go from 6.8 to 3.6. Well, and this gets at the heart of what the senator from Tennessee said, is that today subsidy goes to 26% of our students. 55% of our students pay the 6.8% rate. Under the bipartisan bill, 64%, all undergraduates get 3.66. So if this is about affordability, if this is about what provides the greatest flexibility for students to afford it, then the answer is clear. It's on the chart, but it also computes in the monthly payments that students are obligated to. And the fact is that for a typical student in their first year, taking $5,000 out, $3,500 comes as subsidy, $5,500, $35 comes from subsidies, $2,000 comes from the 6.8% rate. They actually... Senator, yield for a question. I'd be happy to yield for a question.
I just want to ask this, Sarah, I couldn't see the chart from the other side, so I came over here. On that undergrad students, 3.66%, you have 64%. For how many years does that hold? That 3.66%. How many years?
It holds for 1 year, till the readjustment of the 10-year bond, which could be higher, it could be lower. It's higher today than it was in May.
And what does the CBO project that interest rates will do in the next 3 or 4 or 5?
Well, I'm sure that the senators come with a chart on CBO and the projections. But let me just say that we've got an 8.25% consolidation cap. And the reality is that if you're going to move to a market-based system, the question that we have as senators is how do we drive interest rates the lowest for our nation's students? And if you put a hard cap of 8.25, then all of a sudden this interest rate goes up. If we're getting to a zero surplus, it's not going to cost us anything, we're not going to make anything. 3.66 goes up. It doesn't go down. So by having the flexible cap at 8.25, where anybody can consolidate at any time, we're able to do it at the 10-year bond plus 1.85 And this is all CBO numbers. I mean, we're using the same source for this. But I think at the heart of this, and I say for my good friend from West Virginia, the real question is, are we going to let 26% participate in an attractive interest rate, or are we going to extend it to 64%, which is the entire class of undergraduates?
That was a bipartisan agreement that we've had, which I appreciate very much. Let me just say one thing. Here's the last 10 years. The last 10 years, if we would have used the last 10 years with the bipartisan bill would have been kicked in, this is what the students that basically are paying the higher rate now at 6.8% frozen would have been able to take advantage of the lower rates. They never got a chance to take advantage of the lower rates. All we're assuming is if rates go up in 3 or 4 years, they're going to be paying higher rates. We never assume with the market, and that's the reason why you fluctuate with the market on a 10-year T-bill. This would have happened if the 10-year T-bill, look how much lower rates would have been paid in the last 10 years. I know that we can all use figures, you know, any way you want to use them, but the bottom line is it's either going to be market, which has always been market before, and there's been caps that have been much higher, and we're trying to find something that's going to be affordable. But the bottom line is, do we try to protect at the lowest rate? Most undergraduates have the hardest times. Once you get your undergraduate degree, you've got a much higher percentage of making it if you want to get a graduate degree and a higher PhD degree. You've got a much better chance. And the bottom line is we want to keep the rates as low so when you go out you're not burdened with the highest payments. And we have a lot of protections built in that I think a lot of times goes misunderstood and is not explained properly. And I'm glad we're having this colloquy back and forth.
Well, would the senator from Iowa like another question?
I have a statement to make, but not a question.
Well, I'll wrap up in a little while.
Okay.
You know,
if we want to get into a colloquy, that's fine.
Well, I'd rather make my points.
Okay.
That I need to do, because at 12 o'clock we're going to vote on one bill. We're going to vote on a 3.4% extension, kicking the can down the road for 12 months, not fixing the problem, not finding a solution, and continuing to overcharge some students and subsidize another pool and go to bed at night and feel good about this. And I think the reason that we have a bipartisan agreement is there's some that don't feel good about that. We look at it and we say, the United States Senate hadn't done what people sent us here to do, and that's to get as close to right as we can. And again, I say to my colleagues, and I go to the CBO again, the CBO scored the bill. And CBO says that the bipartisan bill is within 0.7% of having no cost and no surplus. I'm not sure that you can get any closer than that. And they've also told us verbally, and they showed us in scoring, put the cap in and you raise the interest rate on all students, all postgraduates, all parents. And our objective when Senator Manchin and Senator King and Senator Coburn and Senator Alexander got into the discussion was, how do we get rates as low as we can? Our focus was on the affordability for the students. Secondarily, the sustainability of the program, which was long-term, something that we didn't visit every 1 or 2 or 3 years. So let me just get into specifics, because there are 4 proposals out there. One of them's already passed the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives has a 10-year variable rate that fluctuates annually. For unsubsidized loans, the rate's 4.31. For subsidized loans, the rate's 4.31, which is 10-year plus 2.5%. For plus loans, 5.74. It removes the consolidation cap, removes it, and it creates caps of 8.5% and 10.5%. Now, the vote that we will have at noon, I think everybody knows, it's a 6.8% rate for most students. 26% get a subsidized rate of 3.4%. The plus loans are at 7.9%, and that's 18% of the loans at 7.9%. Under the President's proposal, the unsubsidized is, I think this is backward, I think it's the subsidized at 10 year and 0.93, the unsubsidized at 10 year 2.93, the plus at 10-year plus 3.93, and it's uncapped and fixed for life. So it brings us to the bipartisan bill. Senator from West Virginia said it well. What were the agreements we made? We're not going to make money, and we're not going to lose money on it. We're at 0.7% according to CBO. Undergraduate is an undergraduate. We shouldn't cheat one to subsidize another. But there should be a subsidy for low income, for at-risk students. The subsidy is that they're not responsible for their interest payment while they're in school. The reality is we extend the same 10-year bond plus 1.85% to all undergraduates. To graduate students, we bring the rate down to 10-year plus 3.4, and for PLUS loans, 10-year plus 4.4. And we keep in place the consolidation cap that has been in law. Let me remind my colleagues what I said earlier before they came. From 1962 to 1965 to 1992, the cap on student loans was 10%. 10%. If we put that in today, it's going to raise the percentage that each individual is going to pay.
So, Senator, just
be happy
Senator
to
yield again. Senator, if I may,